2019, Cedar Rapids made the cover of Time magazine, and we've never done that before. But there we were squeezed in between the names of other cities where mass shootings had occurred in 2019. And the caption was one word on the cover of Time, and it said, enough. Shortly after that magazine came out, we were looking for another topic for community conversation, and we decided that maybe it was time we took a risk and talked about gun violence. The Community Conversation series focuses on social justice issues that are of high interest in our area. This is a patron-driven evening. So without any further ado, let's move this on to the panelists because they're going to help us out tonight. I'm going to introduce them all to you. On my far left, Dale Todd, who has been involved in neighborhood issues and finding solutions to crime and youth violence in Cedar Rapids for more than 30 years. He's been a member of the Cedar Rapids City Council under 2 different forms of government and works on a daily basis to keep our neighborhoods safe for all residents. He's a member of the SET Task Force, Warren Task Force, and Dale chairs the Public Safety and Youth Services Committee of the City Council. Next to him is Lehman-Engledow, who has lived most of her life in Cedar Rapids. She now lives in Swisher and is retired from the University of Iowa. Christine started the Cedar Rapids chapter of Moms Demand Action in February of 2018. She is also the Cedar Rapids lead for the Be Smart program, which is aimed at reducing accidental shooting deaths of children. Next to Christine is Leah Schneider. Leah Schneider came to gun reform advocacy after surviving the Las Vegas shooting in 2017, where 58 people lost their lives. 867 were physically injured, and thousands more obtained emotional trauma. As a mental health counselor, Leah knew the effects of trauma, but being a trauma survivor has changed her life, her work, and her relationships in ways that she's still discovering. Leah tries to bring her lived experience and her hope for a safer tomorrow to the common sense gun reform conversation going on in our nation and around the world. Leah's been working in the mental health and addiction profession for over 10 years, and she resides in Cedar Rapids with her 2 daughters. Next to Leah is Chief Wayne Jerman. He's been a police officer for 41 years, and he was selected Chief of Police for Cedar Rapids in October 2012 after a nationwide search. Since his arrival in Cedar Rapids, he has increased the department's community outreach efforts and formed stronger partnerships with law enforcement partners within Iowa, as well as increasing the department's participation with federal task forces. In 2019, our chief guided the department in acquiring advanced accreditation through the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies. He is an active member of several professional organizations, including the Police Executive Research Forum, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and the Iowa Police Chiefs Association, where he's been selected to represent IPCA as the legislative representative at the Iowa General Assembly. His education includes a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Maryland and an MBA from Frostburg State University. He's a graduate of the FBI National Academy Session 236 and completed the FBI's National Executive Institute Session 35 in September 2012. And finally, Scott Peterson. Scott has been interested in gun violence prevention for over 3 decades and currently serves as the board chair and interim executive director of Iowans for Gun Safety. Iowans for Gun Safety is the only gun safety organization with its primary focus being on the state capital. Scott is a native of Mount Vernon. He graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy in 1975 and served on active duty in the Navy and reserve duty in the Iowa Army National Guard as a helicopter pilot, as well as in other capacities over 22 years. He graduated from the Iowa College of Law in 1984 and worked as an attorney in Linn and Johnson counties until his retirement in 2018. Over the years, his legal focus and experience was in criminal law and government law. Scott lives in Mount Vernon with his wife, Susan Alexander. So let's thank our panel for being here tonight. We so appreciate you, and we're going to get started. For those of you who came in after the introduction, the way this works is, if you have a question, please take a number from the table. I will be randomly calling numbers. When your number is called, just stand up, state your name, and tell us who your question's for and ask your question. Fair enough? All right, I think we're going to be off and running. Give me 1 second to arrange these papers. All right. Who has number 10? Are you ready to ask a question?
Sure.
Okay. What's your question?
My name's Mike, and I would just like to ask, maybe the officer and
Christine.
Mom,
Oh,
as you've come across other communities similar to Cedar Rapids in size and makeup, what have other communities done compared to what Cedar Rapids has done in this issue? And I don't know if the word mistakes is a good word to use, but what mistakes have you seen? What successes have you seen in other communities? Thank you.
I think that's going to be more for you.
Thank you, Mike. Go ahead and you can just flip the on switch there.
There you go.
Thanks, Mike. In terms of what Cedar Rapids is doing compared to other communities, I think the most success all communities are having, including Cedar Rapids, is more community commitment, and that's what I am asking for. Continued commitment from members of our community. That's the best way that we're going to be able to solve the incidents of gun violence here within this city, is for the entire community, people who live and work here and visit here, who are going to not tolerate this senseless acts of violence that continue to occur. I know as a police department, every member of this department is committed to reducing and eliminating the gun violence. We've got tremendous support from our city council, and the rest of the city government, to provide us with the resources that we need to address the acts of again, senseless gun violence. One death is one too many. So I know as a police department, we continue to remain committed to, again, eliminating these acts here in the city. And I would ask again, as I've been asking since I began here, is that this city, this community needs to continue to unite to eliminate it. And that means working together with the police, providing the police with information when we arrive on the scene of an act of gun violence, whether it's a victim of a shooting or a victim whose home or vehicle has been shot. We need to be given information to act on so we can identify those who are perpetrating this violence and hold them responsible and accountable.
Thank you, Chief. Christine?
Well, the only thing I can really add is what we do with Moms Demand Action here in Cedar Rapids. So I don't know about other cities and that kind of thing, but we try to bring awareness to gun legislation and gun violence. We have an event called Wear Orange in the summer. We table at different events around town. We went with the whole state to advocate for gun sense legislation at the state capitol in February. And we just try to bring in more people that will help and call their senators or their congressmen and try to get some sensible gun laws passed.
Thanks, Christine. Let's move on to a member of the community who has number 4. Question number 4.
I do the right number. I'm Jerry Elsey of Cedar Rapids. I want to ask Dale Todd, who was, as you mentioned, a member of the SET task force, which did most of his work in 2016, comprehensive. I want to ask Dale, and this is maybe worth more than 2 minutes, but to give those in this gathering an indication of how much more than just teen violence SET was addressed to in terms of, well, the numbers Dale might tell you about. Please, Dale.
Thank you, Jerry. I'm going to try and answer your question. I think it's helpful when we talk about gun violence to try to quantify that, because there's a couple of different types of gun violence. There's domestic, there's gang violence, those kind of things. I'm going to try to merge my answer with the previous question too. I got involved back in the 90s when crack cocaine first came to town. And what happened back then, we put some strategies in place that now when we look back on them, we think we maybe could have done some things different. So the good news, if there's good news in this story, is that we've got institutional models of what worked and what didn't work. We also have other communities that are doing things that are successful and based on evidence-based practices that make sense. What we learned with crack and what we've learned with some of the violence today, this is going to the SET task force now, we can have a cop on every corner. And that might not stop some of this violence. It's rooted deeper in the social fabric of what's going on these streets and with these kids and with these adults and with these weapons. And so in order to try to make a difference when it comes to violence per se, we realize that it's more of a holistic strategy. It's giving people hope. It's giving people a job and worth and meaning. For kids, we know, and not just kids, but adults. We talk about our War Task Force. Boredom is a big cause for a lot of these folks who get in trouble. And so, an ounce of prevention in terms of recreational opportunities or just different options, whether it's keeping the school open at night or getting a kid to school with a free meal. Those kind of things are cheaper in the long run and make sense. One thing the council's done this year that, I would think traditionally you might not have thought of, we made our buses free for kids. If you show an ID, you can ride the city bus whenever you want to. And that for kids that might not have access to transportation or money, those are those things make a difference. And so I'm trying to be sensitive at the time. I'll get back to your question a little bit more in depth, Jerry. The SET task force is safe, equitable, thriving communities. And the council and the community has really put some things in place. The tough part of that is we're not really ready to roll out a lot of the stuff that really needs to happen. What I've learned over the years is that a lot of times the community is reactive to gun violence, and everybody wants to march and have a meeting, but at the end of the day, that doesn't make a difference. It's the tough stuff behind doors, when you really try to put a social fabric in place that protects these kids and gives others options. And that's what we're trying to do.
We're going to have to call time, Councilman Todd.
And we're getting close to that.
All right, let's go to number 6.
My name is Angela McKinney, and my question is for the Chief of Police. What do you think is the reason for the increase in gun violence in Cedar Rapids?
Thanks, Angela.
Well, kind of to build on what Councilman Todd just said, it's not just one thing. My opinion, since I've been here, and especially after the Aaron Richardson murder, I really took a deep, hard look at, and that's what created the SET task force to begin going. I believe gun violence is a symptom, and all violence is a symptom of an underlying root cause, and there's, again, a number of the causes or a number of the symptoms that go down to the root cause. And some of these are the home life, education, economics, the poverty. I mean, there's a number of issues that I think drive some of the gun violence, and it's not just one item. I know I only have 2 minutes, so I'm going to be real quick, but as I was introduced, I am an active member of PERF, Police Executive Research Forum, and in 2018 in June, I participated in a study, and they came across with the 4 main acts of gun violence. It's suicides, domestics, the mass shootings, and then everyday gun violence. And they came up with 9 recommendations to address those gun violence. I would urge everyone to pull up this report. It's online at policeforum.org. And that's what me and the other 174 other police chiefs and law enforcement executives have continue to strive to work for, especially here in Cedar Rapids. It's a multiple, complex set of issues, but we are making progress, I can assure you of that.
And you said this is online?
Yeah, it's on the web. Mm-hmm. Yeah, policeforum.org.
Okay.
And it's reducing gun violence. It's under their critical issues in policing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chief. All right, our next question, number 19.
My name is Zach Swanson. This question is for the Chief and for Christine. With the hundreds of thousands of gun laws that are currently on the books, what new legislation do you guys feel would help prevent gun crime in this area specifically?
Well, I'll go right to the report that I just mentioned, and the number 1 recommendation made by law enforcement is a certainty of punishment for those who illegally possess and use a firearm. That's what I see and law enforcement sees as the number 1 issue, is that, and I know here in Cedar Rapids, the gun violence that is committed is being committed by those who illegally possess and use firearms. And there are laws already on the books that are enforced, but the studies and the research shows that a certainty of punishment for those who violate this law, the research and studies show that that has an impact, because those who commit the gun crimes will continue to commit the gun crimes as long as they are out in the community. So it's not a length of incarceration, but a certainty that someone, when you are arrested for illegally possessing and using a weapon, that you will be removed from the community.
Christine?
Thank you. Well, we are trying to get an extreme risk law passed in Iowa, and I think that one of the things that people don't know, may not know because it's not covered so well in the news, is that suicides are 2/3 of gun violence deaths. And so this extreme risk law or red flag, it's called different things in different states. But what it does is it allows family members or police to determine that somebody is an extreme risk for either suicide or murder, and it has to be proven, it has to go to a court and be proven, so it's not gonna just take everybody's guns or anything, but it's a temporary order to get guns taken away. So I think that that would be a really good law. Closing the gun show loophole, which means making sure that everyone has to have a background check, so universally, instead of being able to buy guns from non-licensed dealers or through the internet and that kind of thing. Would help. And then I know Police Chief Jerman has also talked about people have guns in their cars and they don't lock them, and then people steal their guns out of their cars. So I don't know of a law that would do that. People should have safe storage, and we talk about a safe storage law, but I don't know how much that will help. I know that safe storage laws are more helpful for when children find a gun and accidentally or without intention shoot somebody. And so I think that's it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks, Zach. I'm going to ask number 11. Do you have a question? Thanks. Can you tell us your name and who your question is for?
My name is Antonio. My question is for Leah. After surviving that kind of trauma that took place, what are your views then? Like, what are your views now as far as gun ownership in the United States, and also like gun violence itself?
Well, dramatically different. I would say that, being a Iowan, I had never heard a gunshot before that night, and so it wasn't something that was even really part of my vernacular, any type of experience. So I really didn't have any views, to be honest with you. I mean, I think things were picking up steam as far as, more shootings were starting to happen and whatnot, but I think sometimes being in the Midwest, we can kind of cushion ourselves to things that maybe go on around us outside, or what we think goes on around us outside. Even though we know that there's gun violence problems here, we can kind of go, okay, well, that's not my issue because I, don't live in New York City or whatever. So it opened my eyes to what that kind of trauma feels like, and coming back to Iowa, being pretty much alone in the experience. My friends that I was with were not there with me at the concert at the time. Felt very isolating, and so I just started diving into what my own experience was, and with that came then, okay, gosh, this stinks to feel, and I can't imagine what others might be feeling when they go through similar things. So it just opened my eyes to looking at the issue. And now, and once you go through something, obviously, it's like you just see it everywhere. So it's a complete 180 from, I knew about trauma. I was a mental health therapist. I worked with trauma. I've even experienced some other forms of trauma, but a gun violence trauma was so different because it was just, it takes your world and kind of flips it upside down. So in a lot of different ways. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. We're going to move to number 7. Hi.
Hi, I'm Candy. I've got a couple questions, but the whole gun violence is really...
What's your question for, Candy?
I guess Chief Jerman and Dale. You read a lot and you hear a lot about people placing blame for this on the police department or on other people in the community. What can we do as citizens to, I guess, start trying to help to find solutions to this versus placing blame?
I like your sweatshirt.
Thank
Well, I appreciate your comments, and I've never been one to really place blame other than I hold the persons who pull the trigger 100% responsible for committing the acts of violence. I don't want to blame victims or persons who put themselves in a position to be a victim of gun violence. The people who are pulling the triggers are the ones that we need to hold responsible, we need to identify. What I would ask is what I asked a little while ago, is we need the cooperation from everybody. When someone sees a shooting and we're called to the scene, it's very difficult to solve an incident with the very little cooperation, if any. So, and that was a while ago more of a continued theme. Now we are seeing more cooperation than we have in the past. That's encouraging, but we need more. I think last year, out of the 99 shots fired, we made arrests in only 9% of those incidents of the shots fired. That doesn't, I mean, that's an all-inclusive number, but again, it's very difficult to solve any type of crime when there's a lack of cooperation. So what we are asking, and I continue to ask for it, is we need more cooperation. There are a number of mechanisms in place that people can provide us information and remain anonymous, so they're not in fear of retaliation. And to get that cooperation, to get people to provide us with that information will help immensely.
Great question.
Just turn it back.
That helps? Does that help? That helps. A great question, and I'll just share with you a little bit about how our process works a little bit. And I have to give a shout out to Mayor Hart, who's here, and Councilman Scott Overland, who is on the Public Safety Committee with me. Whenever there's a shooting in town, Chief sends out an email or one to staff, and we get it. And I can almost tell you word for word what they are. You know, there's a young African-American male shot, showed up in the ER at Luke's or at Mercy, and not cooperative or providing information. That basically is how they all come in, and they come in bursts. Usually when it happens, there's 3 or 4, several in a week's time. So these are groups, these are clusters of folks who, for whatever reason, get into a beef. And we can almost tell you who they are. We can almost tell you when we trace it back that there were several points in that whole lead up to that shooting, that event, where adults or peers or somebody couldn't intervene with the potential of possibly diffusing that situation. and stopping that kid or whoever's involved from getting to a point where they're either going to state jail, or if they're involved in significant activity, they're throwing their career away and they're going to federal prison for dumb stuff, just over a bag of weed or over a fight in some place. And so we are past the point, as she said, about the blame. The blame doesn't do anything. It doesn't get us anywhere as a community. But how can we put in place things that help people and try and hopefully try to provide points where it might not be me, but it's somebody who's a peer who this person might respect or listen to, and can talk to them and say, put away the guns. You know, when I grew up, we didn't have guns. Doesn't mean people didn't fight. We fought all the time. But the next day you got up and you went to school together. For whatever reason, these things continue, they lead up to situations where next thing you know, somebody's getting shot. And so those are the questions we ask ourselves. People call. These things just don't happen. There's usually a lead up, and we're finding out about it after the fact. We're being reactive. If people call us, we can put them in touch with investigators. This is one area where the PCAT team comes in, because they're out on the street and they have it. I mean, usually when things happen, we all have a good gut sense that something's going to happen. We might not know where, but those are the kind of things that help us.
Thank you so much. All right, who has number one?
Oh.
There you are. Number one. Can you tell us your name, please?
Yes, my name is Todd. I have a question primarily to Scott Peterson and Chief. I was supposed to chime in. There is a new constitutional amendment in work, which will use this strict scrutiny language to make it, I suppose, easier to get hold of weapons legally. My question is, what if it's finally enacted, the referendum succeeds, what impact it's going to have on gun violence?
Go ahead, Scott.
Thank you. And this ties into a comment that Chief Jerman made, and that is there are a lot of parts to this, and some of it's at the community level, some of it's at state level, some of it's at the federal level. I think the question you have, Joseph, goes to the strict scrutiny amendment, and that's an amendment that's been passed by the current legislature. If it's passed again next year or in 2022, then on the ballot in November of 2022 will be the amendment for voter thumbs up or thumbs down, basically by Iowans. But what that does, it establishes Iowa does not have the equivalent of a Second Amendment. This started, if my understanding is correct, it's the Second Amendment, but then there's this additional language that adds that anything that's done by a city, county, school district, or the state legislature itself has to, if it's to regulate weapons, it has to pass a strict scrutiny test. And without getting into the weeds about what strict scrutiny is, it's going to be a lot harder for the legislature, as well as counties, cities, and school districts, to do what they feel is appropriate. But that's also one of the areas of concern of where we're at now. Is the question was, what can cities do? Well, the state legislature just in 2017, after starting in 2010, is basically taken most discretion away from cities and counties to regulate weapons. And I think allowing more local control and local regulation of that would be helpful.
And again, I think this isn't about gun control, okay? The number one recommendation, again, is prevent future killings by imposing a certainty of punishment for illegal possession of a firearm. What the research has shown and proven time and time again, many gun criminals have extensive criminal histories, including for illegal gun possession, but do not face significant consequences until they commit a very serious crime. Swift, certain, and proportional punishments can change behavior among some offenders and prevent future more serious gun crimes. Again, that's what I'm promoting, is those individuals who choose to use guns in an illegal manner and fashion need to be held accountable and face the consequences for their choice.
All right, thank you both very much. Would the audience member with number 15 ask their question? Hello.
Hello. My name is Jim Moriarty, and I'd like to ask the Chief, Mr. Peterson. I follow legislation fairly closely professionally, and we have people like Representative Winchell, who's trying to expand gun rights in children's usage, not training them as such, but just not going to schools with guns. And I can't find a parallel in other countries. In Blaine, in Scotland, there was a shooting in 1996 where 13 children and 1 teacher were killed. It didn't happen anymore. Guns were brought back, and that the United Kingdom just doesn't have this problem. And I don't think that they're better people than we are, or smarter people than we are, or wiser people than we are. What is keeping us back seems to be the culture, the legislation. Your thoughts on that, please?
Again, the representatives in this state and other states, they're elected to, pass whatever laws that they feel are needed. I am the legislative liaison, but my job is very apolitical. I don't really dabble into the politics. Again, those individuals at the state level and the federal level are elected to do what they're elected to do. If that's their desire, whether or not I agree with it, is the same along. I have the same voice as you do. I don't know if that's, an accurate or correct answer, but again, there are a number of representatives that feel passionate about a host of issues, and I know guns in this state, people are very passionate about their rights to possess firearms. And again, I don't have a problem with individuals possessing firearms, because if they choose to use them in a legal manner and not commit a crime with them, me as a law enforcement officer, I'm not opposed to it. I do oppose bringing guns onto a school in some other areas, but that's my opposition as a professional law enforcement officer. But an elected official, they can choose to do what they feel they need to do and get their votes needed to pass such legislation.
That's a big question, and I think when you take the 30,000-foot view, what you're looking at, it's kind of hard to compare countries because we have the Second Amendment, and it's not the only aspect of the gun issue, but that's a major difference between, say, Scotland or Australia or other places. But I think what's frustrating to me, and having been involved in this for a while, and I was down to the legislature just a few weeks ago actually, is that I think that we have a lot of conversation that's not productive, and the Second Amendment is by no means, you look at the Heller decision, that it's appropriate for the government to regulate, to protect the health and welfare of its citizens. And I think on the other hand, to say that there's an effort to take guns away, I just ask anybody to tell me what bill was introduced in Congress or what bill was introduced in Des Moines that would take somebody's gun away. And so where I'm optimistic in a sense is if we could get beyond some of the starting points and really have a discussion. I think there's a lot of room that we can do better. We can at a community level, help law enforcement, support law enforcement. I think there are things at the federal level and state law that can be done to fully recognize and honor persons' rights to bear arms, but at the same time, take a number of steps that would make communities safer, states safer, and the country safer.
Can I just expand a little?
Thank you, Scott. I'll come back to you. Let's go to number 12, please.
Hi, my name is Ernie Tron from Cedar Rapids. My question is for the chief and Mr. Peterson. I'll start with Mr. Peterson. I agree we need to have conversations. So to state things that, like, knowing what laws are introduced to say we're not trying to take away any guns. There isn't anything more famous than Mr. O'Rourke say, hell yeah, we're coming for your AR-15s. Hell yeah, we're coming for your AK-47. So we're sitting in a room because of an event that got us on Time Magazine that was committed by a person who was a repeat offender, a multiple felon, and illegally in possession of a gun. It's not like any of those. So I'm always about what can you suggest that's going to help reduce that kind of violence. When you have someone, as the chief has stated over and over, the mass majority of shootings in Cedar Rapids are committed by people that are repeat offenders and prohibited persons. Look at the police accounts for yourself. Look at how it turns out. So do you have suggestions that will curb the activities of violent human criminals? Do you have any suggestions for laws that are going to help with that?
Thank you, Ernie.
Thank you.
I certainly do. I think one of the things that I mean, obviously the chief's mostly involved with crimes, with criminal acts done with weapons, and that's what he's addressing, and that's what other cities, other police departments, sheriff's departments, counties are involved with as well. But that's one part of it. I think another part is somebody mentioned suicide, and that's actually probably in Iowa, most states, that's the leading cause of death caused by guns is suicide. And then you have the accidental shootings and the unintended consequences, and I think you have to put all of those things together. But I do think that the general mentality of more guns will be a solution. I don't agree with that, and I think we have to, in other ways, hold people accountable for whether it's securing weapons or locking a car if it's in there. I mean, I think there are a number of things that can be done, but we can't really cover those in 2 minutes. But I'd be happy to continue the conversation.
Yeah, Ernie, I think we've had the conversation a couple of times. Again, I personally don't think gun control is the issue or the problem. I mean, that genie's out of the bottle. I think responsible gun possessors or ownership, whatever, and I know that there's other organizations that are promoting responsible gun ownership. I think that there are a number of individuals, I don't know if they don't understand. I know you understand how lethal a firearm is, okay? And I think it's part being educated, and that's why I don't understand for the life of me why someone believes it's okay to leave a lethal weapon in a car, and most of the times the car is unlocked. I mean, a gun is a deadly, lethal weapon, and it's not a laptop computer or a cell phone or a pair of sunglasses. It's a lethal weapon, and for some individuals, they need to treat that firearm, and if they choose to carry it, respect that firearm. I just think that, and as you mentioned, again, my number one issue are those individuals who, as you mentioned, illegally possess firearms, and again, they choose. They're knowingly, they know they are not permitted lawfully to carry. They not only choose to do that, when they pick up a firearm, they're already making that decision that they are probably going to be inclined to use that firearm and commit another offense. That's the issue that I think we need to spend more resources in addressing as a country, that individuals who choose to use a firearm in an illegal manner to, again, inflict serious injury and death upon people, again, those are the people that we need to focus on.
Thank you both, and thank you for the question. Let's ask number 9. If you want to stand up and give us your question, if you still have one. What's your name? Hi.
My name is Kristen Bratton, and my question is for the chief of police. Where the guns that are used in violent crimes, where are these coming from?
I think the question it might be, where aren't they coming from? Many times they're stolen. They're stolen from here in Cedar Rapids, they're stolen from vehicles, they're stolen in burglaries, but then they're stolen from other cities and areas in the country. Some are purchased also on the, if you want to say, black market. One item that, again, was discussed in this conference is increasing the punishment for straw purchases. And a straw purchase is when an individual is prohibited from purchasing a firearm legally. So this individual will go to someone who can purchase it legally, and that person will make that purchase. That person will go through that background check or whatnot, and when the retailer or the licensed dealer completes that sale to the individual who is legally allowed to make that purchase, they'll turn that weapon, they'll hand that weapon to the person who's illegally prohibited from possessing it. That's what the straw purchase is. I submit that if individuals who were going to purchase a firearm illegally for their friend, their boyfriend, whoever, if they knew they were facing a mandatory 10-year sentence for doing that, I think that would deter a lot of individuals from taking that risk. That's just my suggestion.
Thank you for the question. All right. Number 2, please.
Hi, my name is Jenny Becker, and I want to start out by saying I am a woman of privilege. I live in a lovely condo by the river. At one side, I look out and see lovely lights, and on the other side, about 3 blocks away, there are kids in huge need. My question is for Leah and Councilmember Todd. I'm wondering what you believe the impacts of children in our community are. And Councilmember Todd, a follow-up to that, what can we all do specifically to help kids that are innocent victims just because of the block they live on?
Thanks, Jenny. Leah?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've worked in the school system, I've worked in the correctional system, I've worked in addiction, rehabilitation, and time again, when I say that I worked with trauma, that is what you see. So trauma, the ACEs scores that have come out, and the impact of what we're noticing emotionally, physically, and everything that stems from childhood trauma, the impact is huge on us. It's huge on them individually, but if, a lot of times I think people want to look at numbers more than humans. And so even if you look at it from a number standpoint and what the economic consequence of having that kind of trauma is in your community and all over, the jobs that they struggle to get and maintain, the relationships, the getting stuck in the system, the list goes on. So it's a huge effect, and what happens usually is you don't catch them till they're adults, and by then you've got trauma upon trauma upon trauma, and it's really hard to unpack all that trauma. So more help needed with these kiddos. When I worked in the school system, I had kindergartners who were talking about holding guns, and they really glamorized it because that's what they saw, and that's what the people in their life were doing. We need more people around these families to support them. We need more kindness and empathy and education into what the system is that impacts the generational kind of trauma that happens. That takes investment in our communities to go in and fund this kind of support that they need. I don't have all the answers. All I can tell you is that it is a huge problem, and I think the earlier that we can attack that problem, the better. Like I said, it's at least a little bit more hopeful if you can get a kiddo in there in kindergarten versus a 40-year-old who has had just decades of this. But I don't know all the exact answers, but we need money and we need help.
I think I got this one, yeah.
Thank you.
Some different thoughts a little bit. I grew up in Chicago on the south side, 67th and Woodlawn. My mom ran a Head Start program. We were poor, but we ate. And we ate the government peanut butter. And once a month, we had a truck from Quaker Oats bring cases of Captain Crunch to our church, and we lived off of that for weeks at a time. But one thing that we asked a question last summer, it was a fair question to ask of the city council. The question was, what are we doing for at-risk kids in at-risk neighborhoods? And I want to go to something Deidre Doolin and I were talking about earlier. And this is not to be critical, but just to shed some light on it. He suggested that there's less for kids to do nowadays than there were 20 years ago, 30 years ago when we were growing up. And you know what? To a degree, he's right. Because when we asked this question, the answer that we got was we really, as a city, we aren't doing a lot. But when we went out and we tried to research the data and see who's doing what. And you know what? There really is a lot of stuff going on, but it's fragmented and it's not coordinated. And it's disconnected. People aren't talking. And so what we're trying to do as a city, because we do have resources, is to drive that discussion, that paradigm, so that there really is a slate of programming, opportunities, and resources for kids to go out that's actually connected so that we all know what's going on and where. Sometimes you find out some of this programming that's going on is not necessarily where the kids are. We didn't have anything going on over at the J Street Apartments where we had a flare-up last summer. Now we're trying to have things there. So that's one of the byproducts of the SET task force. We've had 2 grant cycles now where we actually have all these programming folks getting together, trying to coordinate with a focus on gun violence and youth prevention. And it's not perfect yet, but the goal is that it lays the framework for not just this summer, but the summer after that. And it's really forcing people who historically haven't worked together to work together. If they want to get funding from the city or other entities, they need to work together, and they need to have a consensus for what that outcome is, and that they're structured. I mean, we're not just giving money away to everybody that wants to have a basketball league. We're talking about what kind of programming, what kind of structure, what kind of expertise, what's the goal, what's the business plan. We're asking those questions that we really didn't do in the past. So hopefully that's going to help provide more of a foundation for those things so that, I have to say, by the time they're 40, usually they're coming out of the system and they realize they got a chance. But it's so sad when we get these emails and these kids are 14, 15 years old, they've got a gun, and you hope that they're not lost, but you really worry about what their future is going to be.
Thank you. Number 5, please.
My name is Dietrich Elderwood. I am from Cedar Rapids. I've talked to a lot of young folk in this community, some surprising to me when they say how easy it is for them to access guns. That's scary, just really. For some of them, it's easier to get guns than it is drugs. That's scary, even though it's easy to get drugs too. However, for Scott and Dick, what can Cedar Rapids do to minimize the access to illegal guns for young people and others that shouldn't have?
And the question is for Scott and Dale. Okay. Why don't you go ahead, Dale?
You're so right. And we with that task force 2 years ago, we wanted to wash, and you can do this in any high school. And you can ask a kid, how hard is it to get a gun? It takes them about an hour if they really want to get a gun. And so I come from that school that says, we've got too many guns out there to begin with. And a lot of them are, as Chief mentioned, they're stolen. They end up, they're traded. I want to go back to this thing. This whole piece of social media and our culture where we think you connotate a gun with being cool and with masculinity. We have to, those are, we shouldn't be thinking like that. And somehow we have to get to those kids that there's other opportunity. There's opportunity out there. And whether it's a job or whether it's participation in sports, those are options that we need to get to them and to stress that this is just as important as you think it is being cool on your Facebook page with a gun up in the air. And so I can tell you this, it's not going to be me, it's going to come from their peers. And it's going to come from people that are a little bit older than them, that maybe understand the game and how the game isn't as cool and the outcome is not as great as TV and the culture leads them to believe. And so that's where we have to sort of allocate resources. And I'll tell you, it's sort of tough because I like to think I'm cool. I'm not cool and they don't listen to me. But it's getting those role models like Brandon Jackson, who's sitting up here, who still has the ability to connect to these kids and provide opportunities and talk their lingo and say, hey guys, there's another opportunity, there's another road out there. It's not going to be perfect, but we're going to help you. And so those are, there's things that we do in terms of logistics for people who have guns that are involved in gun activity all the time. Our PCAT team is going to go after you, and if we're going to give you an opportunity to make corrections in your life, but if you don't, and if you're still shooting in our neighborhoods, we're going to ask the U.S. government, Department of Justice, to get you on their radar screen. And nobody wants to do that, because once that happens, that's 10, 15 years of a kid's life down the tubes. We also understand the cost, but the reality is that we're not going to put up with people that are going to continue to stay involved in gunfire in this community. So.
Scott?
Yeah, I don't hold myself out to be an expert in Cedar Rapids policy or...
It's the same in Dubuque and Iowa City.
Yeah.
They're all the same.
I think I mentioned it earlier, and I think that's where you get down to community level. What can we do as a mayor, as council members? It's the police department, it's the sheriff's department. But with the state law preempting local government from doing what it thinks is best for its particular situation, I think it's one of the biggest handicaps to cities responding to that. And just for example, states, and I was asked a question earlier about what laws would I recommend. I think it's fair to require gun owners to be responsible for safe storage. I think it's fair to require gun owners to report when a weapon is stolen. And yet, if it's not done at the state level, then the city has a real challenge of implementing something like that. But I think that's the point, is what's good for Cedar Rapids maybe not be the same thing that'll work in Dubuque or Des Moines or Mount Vernon or Sioux City or Mount Damon, I don't know. But let the local officials, let them do their best to address that situation. And right now it's very difficult.
Thank you. We have about 20 minutes left. And we have probably 6 folks yet with questions. So I will be calling your name, your number. Please, everyone who has asked questions, you're doing this absolutely perfectly. You're saying your name, you're telling us who you want to ask the question of, and then you ask your question. Let's confine it to one panelist from here till the end of the evening. And panelists, I encourage you to listen to the question and speak to the question. Conversation is two-way. Of course, we have experts in the room, but we want to make sure that questions are getting answered. All right? So let's move on. Number lucky 13. There you are. Hello.
My name is Dr. Kirk. I've been with the gun safety for the last 4 years. To the chief, what can be done, if any, to keep guns and knives out of school?
Guns and knives out of schools. Thank you.
I didn't hear the whole question. What can be done to keep guns and knives out of schools? Part of what Dale mentioned, it's not cool to have a gun or any weapon. Really, why does someone need to bring a knife to school? Okay, why does someone need to bring a gun to school? What can we do to keep them out is we've got to educate our youth and educate those who feel the need, whether or not it's for their protection or to fulfill their sense of being cool. I think it's not necessary, we already have laws to prohibit it. So I think we need to, again, help educate and mentor those individuals who feel a need to want to do that.
All right, thank you. Number 2, please.
That's me again, my husband. He
defer
passed
it,
along.
huh? Okay.
We've been married a long time, so. So I'll work.
Will allow.
Yeah, thank you. In the spirit of civil discourse, my question is directed to you.
Sure.
As the representative of the library.
Of course.
I am wondering if this location, in this setting, like this, could be a barrier for entry for people who are afraid to come into the library at night or may have jobs that require them to be working at 6 p.m. These community conversations are amazing. They're at 6 o'clock at the library, and I wonder about your response to a different location. Is there childcare available tonight?
No, there is not childcare available tonight.
So my question would be around the logistics of the next community conversation,
On that, we can talk about it offline, but what I can say is, you're not going to find a more inclusive building in the city. We've got everybody here, and we have programs for everyone.
I would respectfully disagree. I think in many cases churches are more inclusive. It's hard to get in here if you're working right now, and if you have little kids, this is not the place to be. So
what you're asking is for the library to do a program in another place? Is that what you're asking for?
I'm just asking if those questions regarding the individuals who don't finish work at 5 o'clock like me.
Or me.
Well, you and I are women of privilege, so we get to be a more inclusive setting could encourage more honest conversation. So that would just be my comment following on that question.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. All right, number 3.
That's actually my husband.
Oh, that's
You,
let's
you
try
called
none.
me
I
twice.
called 2 twice. Okay, let's try 8.
Hi, my name is Leland.
Hi, Leland.
I've spent most of my life working with kids between 11 and 17, about 35 years. But at the end of my career, if I had to wave a magic wand and do a laser-like focus, it would be 0 to 3. So, you know, but when Leland becomes junior high, I have a lot of character traits for him. So, I'll direct this to Leah. It's a difficult question, but how do we get, we've got to reach more parents in this community. And to me, until that's solved, we will never solve these problems. This is a breakdown of the family structure in our society. That's one of my bandwagon speeches. Anyway, so how do we access that so that mom or dad can have some skills and support before they get to that age where those values are changed? To me, we've got to look at that as a piece of the pie. There are many pieces of the pie.
Absolutely, it's so hard, because when I was in the schools, I would find that is the hardest piece, is the parental buy-in, right, to getting their kiddo help. There's a lot of secrecy, for lack of a better word, for fear of opening up, you know, family stuff. I think we all might feel that on some level sometimes. But, and one thing that I was thinking about after the question I answered before about the kids was, you know, we need more help for our people that are in the helping professions, our teachers, our counselors, our therapists out there. It is a daunting task and next to impossible to do when you're one therapist in a couple different schools. So, I mean, again, no complete answers, but our people who hold the purse strings, you know, need to open up some more funding for a lot of different kinds of help that we can offer. Because you're right, it's hard to undo things, and that early age is so important. The parents, they want to feel not judged, and they want to, I think that once you can make a connection with anybody, and they can know that you hear them and that your help is like on a genuine level and not to shame them into something. How do you build that? I don't necessarily have the answers. I know that there's a lot of people out there really trying hard, but it's just overworked, underpaid, underappreciated, underserviced. So we need more help. I mean, I think that part of that goes into that, and that just goes into an expansion of what all of the help that we can provide all the families, and looking at it as a system. Like, this is not just the kid at school having behavior issues, right? This is parents at home struggling to make ends meet, struggling to, you know, with whatever particular issues that they have. So I just wish that we had more opportunity, because there's a lot of really good people in this community working really hard to do the best that they can, but it's a lot, so we just need more. I don't know. Thanks.
Thanks, Leo. Okay, who has number 14?
Hi, I'm Curtis Bell. I guess my question goes to Dale. What type of programs can we have in the schools, or are we doing presently in the schools to like make the kids more aware and make better choices?
First thing, and I'm going to go off script here, but we're going to have more of these conversations. The key is part of the SET task force is called GVI, Gang Violence Intervention, Group Violence Intervention. Basically, it involves the community getting together, talking these issues through. One important component that's also part of the SET task force is the schools. Is the city, we can't just take care of the issue at night and on weekends, but during the day they go to schools. And it's all about educational funding, people who have social services who can talk to these kids. It's our school resource officers that have built a lot of bonds with some of these kids. It's having a school open at night and on weekend in the summertime. A lot of the schools in these neighborhoods that are impacted are the only institutions around, and they're safe places where kids can go. And so it's a smorgasbord of things. The good news is, as the city goes, we feel real good with our relationship with the current administration of the school district. And we're talking to them through the city manager's office about how we can do things that, again, historically we have not done before. The mayor and I were working on, what's going to happen in McKinley and at Johnson School this summer. We're trying to get ahead of those things. On the other hand, though, these teachers have incredibly tough challenges. Some of these kids are coming from cycles of dysfunction and from really tough places. Their parents I've known back when crack came to town, and they're the kids of those parents that we were all, we talked about back in those days. And so some of these kids are incredibly tough cases, but I'm one of those people that believe that deep down inside, and this could be corny, but deep down inside, most kids, if you can catch them at the right time, they're good, and you can save them. It's a matter of having the resources and the time and the mentors and the role models in their lives that can make a difference. That's what we're striving for. It's a lot to ask for, but you see it, and you see it. I see it in these schools almost on a daily basis. These teachers that go to school, they're trying to make a difference, and they're, some of these kids are tough. But at the end of the day, I think we finally have a framework in place where we're all talking together and we're all talking about strategies that go to the question of what are we doing for at-risk kids in at-risk neighborhoods to help prevent and stem this violence that we aren't used to. Good question.
Thank you. All right, number 16, please.
My name is Chris Carlson, and I'm from Melbourne. I'm going to direct my question to the person from Melbourne. Before I do that, though, I'd like to thank every single member of the panel for all you do on this. Scott, you mentioned some legislation that you would support that would be effective in reducing gun violence. And Christine, you mentioned some as well. But Scott, I was wondering, are there any pieces of legislation that you think have any chance of passage at the state level? And that is another way of asking it. Is there any piece of legislation that might gain bipartisan support?
It's my best read of that. Thanks, Chris. My best read of that, it's highly unlikely. It's not, I say completely impossible, but I think we're at a point where it is a very partisan issue, unfortunately. And I think gun violence prevention, gun safety used to be, there's bipartisan support for that. And we've had a swing where, oh yeah, I'm sorry, I'm supposed to use this. We've had a swing, and I think, given this year, especially with the first funnel deadline passing, I'm not aware of any bill that we supported made it through the funnel. That doesn't mean it's impossible for it to come back up, but it's highly unlikely. And I think that's the reality of the political climate. And hopefully with these kinds of discussions, and I'll just join in, I think whether it's here or somewhere else, but the more we can have these discussions, and I think it's a great approach to this particular problem, probably a lot of other things, but this one in particular, because I really do believe there's a lot more room in the middle than what we get from the conversations that we hear. And I'm hoping that we're going to get there, and I have some optimism about that. But not this year.
Thank you, Scott. I think there's only one person left to ask a question if number 17 has a question. Hello, number 17.
It's a fair question, and it's one that I've struggled with over 20, 30 years. It's based on this premise in my eyes that Cedar Rapids is like a tale of two cities. You see growth, you see progress, but at the same time you see poverty and kids that are not, hopelessness and cycles of dysfunction. And so the challenge for a city and a community is you have to be able to do both. One funds the other. And in a city with a $250 million budget, I mean, we have the ability and the resources to do things. Okay? In order to do that, though, we have a fundamental obligation to try to make sure that programs are sustainable and that we're just not throwing money at a cause just to make ourselves feel good. And so in order to do that that program has to have leadership and structure and outcomes that are measurable. Now what happens is that when you get to at-risk programming and inner-city poverty, those type of programs, a lot of times it's tough to have a program that we are comfortable with. So we have to make compromises. And I believe that we're willing to do that. But, and in fact, I know we're going to do things here traditionally. I've said it like 3 times tonight. The city hasn't done before. We're already doing things on the rec side. We're doing programming in places that we didn't do before. It's never enough. We can always do more, but we're getting the things in place where A, staff is comfortable, the council is comfortable doing it, and I think the community's going to feel good with doing it. I believe in this community, when we see a good idea and a good program, we do it. And there's the resources to do it. But you have to prove, and you have to demonstrate to people that you're legitimate and you're in it for the right reasons. And if that's the case, we're more than willing to take a leap of faith and make things happen. But is it too much to ask for a business plan? Is it too much to ask for, the things that you need? If you really want to do the right thing and make a difference in the kid's life, I think it's fair to have a couple things in place. And so sometimes what we have to do, and what we're learning we're going to have to do, is we're going to have to help provide the structure to get those things in place. That's another leap of faith. We did it years ago in neighborhood associations, with neighborhood associations. Sometimes that vehicle is already there. You don't necessarily need to recreate the wheel, but you can partner with the Boys and Girls Club, you can partner with 4 Oaks, Tanager Place, the schools, those kind of things. 20 years ago, we had Jane Boyd, and everybody went to Jane Boyd, and Jane Boyd did all the programming. Now we have to do things a little bit differently. And so we're more than willing to have that discussion with you and anybody else that wants to have it. If it's a good idea, don't be afraid to bring it to us. We're going to ask you some tough questions. We expect you to do the homework. If you can do those, I think there's a good chance we'll have a partnership in place. Thanks.
Right, I think everyone asked their question. And I appreciate everybody being so civil. It's very nice. This isn't a bad gig, is it? I do appreciate y'all coming to our community conversations. Mostly I appreciate our panel giving us, sharing their expertise, and being willing to sit up there and just take questions all night. It's not easy. It's not easy. But they all felt it was important, and I think they deserve a round of applause. So thank you for all